Hey, thanks for tuning in. This is Dan from SoundLookout.com. Today we're going to take 5 minutes and really quickly look at what you can expect to have in a vocal chain in your mix. First of all, let's get started with pitch correction. Pitch correction is something that I would recommend for every singer. A lot of sound producers are going to say, you know, you're going to want to stay away from pitch correction. I know that, you know, you can use it as a crutch. Absolutely. Avoid doing that. What you want to do is you want to get the best singer with the best tone recorded, but it's still a good idea to put on pitch correction. What does that do? It snaps your mix up a little bit better. It actually will clear up the tone in the singer's voice a little bit more, making it pop out in your mix. It's going to adjust those, it's going to adjust the pitch, make it a little bit more tight to the music. So really your vocals are going to pop out a little bit better. Second thing you want to take a look at is roll-off. So if you have an equalization plugin, at this point, a great one to use is, well, the one that I use for a lot of my mixes is SSL 4000, the E-strip. It'll have a little roll-off option there, just not a parametric EQ in this case, but just a single adjustable roll-off. And I usually keep the roll-off at about, for vocals, generally 150 to 200 hertz. I roll off the bottom, unless I really want that really low end of the voice, which is not very often. If you take that out, you're going to notice that when it comes to the compression, it's actually going to work better with the compressor. The compressor is going to know what to do. It's going to have a cleaner signal to work with. So the next thing in the chain, one step down, is compression. Again, what I use is the E-strip from SSL 4000. You don't have to use that. It's a system that works for me. Excuse my cell phone. So what you do for most cases, in a rock mix, we'll talk, for example, I will have my ratio for a verse anywhere from 4:1 to 6:1 in most cases. So that means that when audio is coming into the compressor and you have, and if in the case of 4:1, if you have 4 decibels coming into the compressor looks at the ratio and says, how do I deal with that, Mr. Ratio? And Mr. Ratio says, 4:1 ratio, that means you're going to spit out only 1 decibel for every 4 decibels of information that comes in. And of course, your attack and your release time determines how quickly the compressor is going to react and do what it's supposed to do by saturating that down to the 1 decibel from the 4. So 4:1 to 6:1. Course, I'm generally looking at an 8:1 or higher. It really, I find in rock mixes especially, even electronic pieces, it really makes your voice pop. If you can keep it at an 8:1, maybe don't give it quite as fast of an attack time, but if you can saturate that voice quite a bit by using 8:1 ratio, it'll sit better in your mix and it'll just sheen a little bit on the top. So play around with that. You can also have in a lot of cases where if you do a really fast attack and release time, for that pumping and breathing effect, a lot of artists like to use that too in the course. So play around. You're gonna have to play around with that. Threshold is always dependent on what kind of input gain you have into your channel. If you have a lot of gain, let's say you got a really hot preamp, you're going to want that threshold to be significantly closer to 0 than if you had a preamp that was not running very hot. Then in which case you'd want to have a lower threshold. And the threshold is basically just the number that determines when does the compressor start chopping off that sound. So let's say here that you've got a compressor that is at a simple 2:1 ratio, and you've got a sound that is 50 decibels. So you've got a 50 decibel sound. The compressor says, okay, 2:1. If you have a threshold that is set at 25 decibels, that means that compressor is only looking at that top 25 decibels. And the compressor, remember, wants to chop it wants to chop that volume in half, essentially, because it's taken 2 decibels in, 1 decibel out, right? So what it's looking at is the top 25 decibels, which is the threshold that you set. And it's gonna chop that off. So you're gonna end up, from that 25, you're gonna end up with 12.5 decibels. So that's really important to know. It's not gonna, the compressor's not gonna be affecting the entire sound. It's only gonna be affecting that threshold that you set. So that's what that adjustment is. Usually my adjustment will be for around 15 to 25 decibels. And last but not least, you're gonna wanna put your de-esser on after that. One that I use Cubase. You can kind of see it running in the back here. I find that Cubase has a fairly good de-esser on it. I'm gonna put that de-esser after the compression and roll-offs, and that's gonna work really well. Usually they're gonna have a male-female threshold setting, and pick the male obviously if you're male, and vice versa. Pretty simple. And after that, you're gonna want to look into delays. In most cases, guys, you're gonna want to send your delays. If you're using any kind of DSP, using a send is really gonna clean up your CPU space. Instead of having a separate reverb and delay plugin for every single channel, if you only have one plugin for your reverb and your delay, and you send your channel mix to it with an auxiliary send, then there's really only one plugin working. Let's say you've got 50 channels and you all want reverb. Well, that one plugin would still be working. It'd be working a little bit harder, but it's one plugin as opposed to opening 50 instances of plugins. Really gonna save on your CPU. So that's it. If you have any questions, definitely drop me a comment, drop me a message, and we'll talk to you soon.